The autumn breeze carried the scent of possibility as Andrew stepped onto the tree-lined campus of Westmore University for the first time. His one backpack held just 2 notebooks, a pencil case, and a calculator he'd saved up for by working weekends at his uncle's auto shop. But what the backpack couldn't show was the knowledge Andrew had built up over years of teaching himself math from whatever resources he could find. Growing up on the south side of the city, Andrew's high school didn't offer advanced math classes. The school library had outdated textbooks, and the single computer lab was usually broken down. But Andrew had a gift that wouldn't be denied. He would take the bus across town every Saturday to sit in the public library, working through calculus textbooks while other kids his age were hanging out at the mall or playing basketball. "You sure you understand what you're reading?" the librarian had asked him once, noticing the complex equations covering his notebook pages. When Andrew explained the problem he was solving, her eyebrows shot up in surprise. After that, she started setting aside math books that came in, creating a special shelf just for him. Now, standing in front of the mathematics department building, a tall brick structure with ivy climbing its walls, Andrew took a deep breath. The full scholarship that had brought him here still felt like a dream. His mom had cried when the letter came, telling everyone at church about her boy going to that fancy school where all the smart people go. Andrew checked his schedule again. Room 307. Advanced Calculus with Professor Thompson. He'd heard stories about Thompson, how he'd made students cry, how he published famous papers, how he wore the same bow tie every day. Some online forums called him the math executioner because of how many students dropped his class after the first exam. The classroom was already half full when Andrew arrived. He chose a seat in the middle row, not too far back to seem uninterested, not too far forward to draw attention. The other students chatted among themselves, many clearly knowing each other from previous classes. Andrew noticed he was one of only 2 black students in the room of 30. Professor Thompson entered exactly at 9:00 a.m., not a minute early or late. He was shorter than Andrew had imagined, with grey hair and thick glasses that made his eyes look unnaturally large. The infamous bow tie was there, dark blue with tiny white dots. "Welcome to Advanced Calculus," Thompson announced without smiling. "If you're looking for an easy A to pad your GPA, the door is right behind you." No one moved. "Good. Now, I don't believe in wasting time with icebreakers or reviewing basic concepts you should already know. Let's begin." For the next hour, Thompson filled 3 blackboards with equations, formulas, and theorems. Andrew's hand moved quickly across his notebook, not just copying but understanding. While others looked increasingly confused, Andrew felt a growing excitement. This was the kind of math he'd been teaching himself for years. When Thompson wrote a particularly complex equation, then turned to the class with a challenging look, Andrew realized he'd seen this problem before, in one of the advanced books the librarian had saved for him. He'd spent weeks figuring it out. "Anyone?" Thompson asked, his tone suggesting he expected silence. "No. This is why I question the admission standards every year." Andrew hesitated. Back home, standing out hadn't always been safe. Being the smart kid sometimes meant becoming a target. But something inside him, maybe his mother's voice saying, "Don't you hide your light," pushed his hand into the air. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting. The new face has something to say. Go ahead." "Andrew, sir." "Andrew Washington." "Well, Mr. Washington, enlighten us." As Andrew began explaining his approach to the problem, he noticed Thompson's expression shift from skepticism to surprise, and then, just briefly, to something that looked almost like concern. The professor's eyes narrowed as Andrew continued, connecting concepts that even some graduate students struggled with. What Andrew didn't know yet was that this moment, this simple raising of his hand, would set in motion events that would change not just his life, but the culture of the entire department. Professor Thompson had just met his match, though neither of them realized it yet. The journey had begun, and it would not be an easy one. By the end of the first week, word had spread through the math department about the new scholarship student who had caught Professor Thompson off guard. Andrew tried to keep a low profile, finding a quiet corner in the library between classes, but he could feel the curious glances from other students. Thursday morning came with a light rain tapping against the classroom windows. Professor Thompson walked in with a stack of papers and a look that made the room fall silent instantly. "Today," he announced, "we're going to see who's been paying attention and who's been wasting my time." He adjusted his bow tie. "I'll be calling students to the board to solve problems. This isn't graded, but it will give me a clear picture of who doesn't belong in this class." The first student called up, a guy named Ben who always sat in the front row, solved his problem with shaky hands but got through it. Thompson nodded without comment and called the next student. As each person finished, the problems seemed to get slightly harder. Andrew tried to make himself invisible, hunching over his notebook. But somehow he knew what was coming. "Mr. Washington," Thompson finally said, his voice cutting through the room. "Your turn." As Andrew walked to the board, he could feel every eye on him. The problem Thompson wrote down was nothing like the others. It covered half the board, a complex integration requiring multiple techniques that they hadn't even covered yet. Someone behind Andrew whispered, "That's not fair." Another voice responded, "Shay, he'll hear you." Thompson handed Andrew the chalk with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take your time. Or would you prefer something more basic?" The classroom grew so quiet Andrew could hear the clock ticking on the wall. He took a deep breath, remembering the nights he'd spent working through problems by flashlight when the power was out in his neighborhood. This was just another puzzle to solve. Andrew started writing, his hand moving confidently across the board. He broke down the problem into steps, finding a clever substitution that simplified the entire equation. As he worked, he could feel Thompson's eyes on him, watching for any mistake. When Andrew put down the final answer and circled it, he turned to face the professor. Thompson's face had changed. The smug smile was gone, replaced by something Andrew couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Disbelief? Concern? Thompson cleared his throat. "That's one approach." He stepped closer to the board, examining Andrew's work. Though most textbooks would recommend a different method. "Yes, sir," Andrew said politely. "But this way reduces the number of steps by eliminating the need for partial fractions." The class was dead silent. No one had ever challenged Thompson's methods before. "And where did you learn this particular approach, Mr. Washington?" "I figured it out when I was studying on my own. The traditional method seemed inefficient." Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "Inefficient? You found a standard calculus technique. Inefficient?" A girl in the front row, Lily, who had been kind to Andrew during the first class, looked back and forth between them, her eyes wide. "You may sit down," Thompson finally said. As Andrew returned to his seat, the professor added, "See me after class." The rest of the hour passed in a blur. When the bell rang, students filed out quickly, a few giving Andrew sympathetic glances. Lily paused at his desk. "That was amazing," she whispered before leaving. Andrew approached Thompson's desk, his heart pounding but his face calm. "Mr. Washington," Thompson said without looking up from his papers, "where did you actually study before coming here?" "East Side High School, sir." "And they taught this level of mathematics there?" His tone made it clear he didn't believe it. "No, sir. They didn't offer calculus. I taught myself." Thompson looked up then, his eyes narrowing. "That's hardly believable." "It's the truth, sir." "Well, Mr. Washington, I've been teaching for 30 years. I've seen many students come through that door thinking they're special. Most aren't." He shuffled his papers. "Perhaps today you got lucky with that problem. Perhaps you've memorized certain solutions. We'll see how you perform as the semester progresses and the material becomes truly challenging." As Andrew walked out of the classroom, he realized the professor had done him a favor in a way. All his life, people had underestimated him. And all his life, he'd proven them wrong. This time would be no different. 2 weeks into the semester, a pattern had emerged. Every time Andrew raised his hand in class, Professor Thompson would either ignore him or cut him off mid-explanation. Meanwhile, other students received nods of approval for answers that weren't nearly as thorough as Andrew's. "Did you notice what happened today?" Lily asked as they walked out of class together. They had formed a small study group with 2 other students, meeting at the campus coffee shop twice a week. "You mean when Thompson basically stole my method for solving the differential equation, but pretended he came up with it himself?" Andrew said with a tired smile. "Yeah, I noticed." Lily shook her head. It's not right. He marks your homework differently too. Kevin turned in almost the exact same solution as you for problem 6 last week, but you got points taken off for lack of clarity and he didn't. Andra shrugged. He was used to working twice as hard for half the credit. I just need to pass the class. Pass. Andra, you're the best math student I've ever seen. You should be getting recognition, not whatever this is. They reached the coffee shop where their study partners, Kevin and Raj, were already waiting. As they settled in with their books, Raj looked up from his laptop. Hey, have you guys heard about the topology seminar that Thompson runs? It's supposed to be for grad students, but exceptional undergrads can apply. The deadline is next week. Andrew's eyes lit up. Topology, the study of spaces and how they can be stretched and twisted without breaking, had fascinated him since he discovered it in an old textbook. He had notebooks filled with his own explorations of the subject. You should apply, Kevin said to Andra. Seriously, you get in for sure. With Thompson in charge? I don't think so, Andrew replied, opening his textbook to the day's assignment. Lily wasn't ready to drop it. You know what? I'm going to start keeping track of everything. The comments on your homework, the way he cuts you off in class. If we document it, maybe we can talk to someone in the department about it. Andrew wanted to tell her not to bother. Throughout his life, pointing out unfairness had often backfired, but the determination in Lily's eyes stopped him. That evening, alone in his dorm room, Andrew pulled out his personal notebooks, the ones filled not with homework, but with his own mathematical explorations. He flipped to the section on topology, where he'd been working on a problem that had interested him for months. He'd read an article by Professor Thompson about a particular topological conjecture that remained unsolved. The professor had attempted an approach that Andrew thought missed something important. What if there was another way to look at it? As the clock ticked past midnight, Andrew's desk lamp cast a small circle of light on his papers. His roommate had long since fallen asleep. Outside, the campus was quiet except for the occasional security vehicle passing by. Andrew wrote page after page of calculations, stopping only when his eyes burned from exhaustion. Looking at his work, he felt a mixture of excitement and doubt. Could he, a freshman who taught himself math from library books, have found something that a prominent professor had missed? The next day, Andrew almost fell asleep in his morning English class. But by the time calculus rolled around, he was alert, his mind still buzzing with the possibilities he'd discovered the night before. Professor Thompson was in a particularly sharp mood. Today we'll see who actually did the reading, he announced, pacing in front of the blackboard. Mr. Reynolds, explain the key insight of Theorem 4.3. Kevin stumbled through an answer, and Thompson nodded with minimal correction. He moved on to other students, praising their efforts even when they struggled. When Andrew's turn came, Thompson's question was deliberately convoluted. Mr. Washington, explain the relationship between the intermediate value theorem and the extreme value theorem in the context of discontinuous functions. That's a trick question, Andrew replied calmly. The extreme value theorem requires continuity on a closed interval. It doesn't apply to discontinuous functions at all. A flicker of annoyance crossed Thompson's face. That's correct, he said coldly, though a more complete answer would have explored the nuances of. Actually, Lily interrupted, something she never did in class. Andrew's answer was exactly right. The textbook specifically states, I don't recall asking for your input, Ms. Chen, Thompson snapped. After class, Lally showed under her notebook. She had started a log just as she'd promised. Dates, questions asked, responses given, grades received. The pattern was unmistakable when laid out clearly. What are you going to do with that? Andrew asked. I don't know yet, she admitted, but someone needs to see it eventually. That night, Andrew returned to his topology problem with renewed determination. If Thompson wouldn't see his potential in class, perhaps there was another way to make him see. The midterm exam papers were handed back face down. Andrew flipped his over, expecting the worst but hoping for the best. His heart sank as he saw the red C+ marked at the top alongside the comment, unclear methodology. See me. Around him, students compared grades. Kevin leaned over. What did you get? Andrew hesitated before showing him. A C+? That's crazy. I got an A, and I know for a fact your answers were better than mine. Kevin looked genuinely upset. This isn't right. After class, Andrew waited until everyone had left before approaching Thompson's desk. His hands gripped his exam paper tightly, wrinkling the edges. "Professor, I'd like to understand where I went wrong." He kept his voice level, respectful. Thompson barely looked up. "Your solutions lacked clarity and rigor. This isn't high school, Mr. Washington." "I double-checked every answer against the textbook after the exam," Andrew said, opening his paper to the first problem. "This solution matches the example in Chapter 4 exactly." Thompson sighed heavily. "There are established methods we expect students to use. Creating your own approach may work occasionally, but it shows a lack of understanding of fundamental principles." "But my answers are correct," Andrew insisted, flipping through the pages. "And my work demonstrates all the steps." "Perhaps in your background, this level of work seems exceptional," Thompson said, finally meeting Andrew's eyes. "But at this institution, we expect true mathematical rigor." The words hit Andrew like a slap. "Your background." The implication was clear. "My background, sir?" Thompson looked away. "I simply mean that without proper early training in mathematical thinking, students often develop shortcuts that won't serve them at higher levels." Andrew wanted to tell him about the hours he'd spent teaching himself from tattered library books, about solving problems by flashlight when the electricity was cut off, about the pure joy he felt when a solution finally revealed itself after days of struggle. But he knew it wouldn't matter. "Thank you for the explanation, Professor," he said stiffly, gathering his exam paper. As he turned to leave, Thompson added, "I would suggest focusing on the standard methods rather than trying to reinvent mathematics, Mr. Washington. It would serve you better in the long run." The walk back to his dorm felt longer than usual. The autumn leaves that had seemed so beautiful when he arrived now crunched lifelessly under his feet. For the first time since starting at Westmore, Andrew felt truly alone. He dropped his backpack on his bed and sat at his desk, staring at the C+ that seemed to mock him from the paper. Then his eyes moved to his nightstand, where a framed photo showed his mother standing proudly in front of their apartment building, her arm around his shoulders on high school graduation day. "Don't you let anyone tell you what you can't do," she had told him that day. "Your mind is a gift. Use it." Andrew opened his drawer and pulled out his topology notebook. Flipping through pages of his own theorems and proofs, he stopped at his latest work, the problem related to Thompson's research. He had been making real progress. With sudden clarity, Andrew realized that arguing about midterm points was missing the bigger picture. If he wanted to prove himself, he needed to go beyond the classroom. He turned to a fresh page and began refining his approach to the topology problem. Hours passed as he worked, erasing and rewriting, following logical paths to their conclusion. Around midnight, something clicked, a connection between two concepts that no one else had made before. Andrew sat back, heart racing. If he was right, and he was almost certain he was, he had just solved a problem that had stumped researchers for years. A problem that Professor Thompson himself had tried and failed to solve in his published papers. This wasn't just about passing a class anymore. This was about showing what he was truly capable of. The next morning, Andrew spotted a flyer on the mathematics department bulletin board, Annual Mathematics Symposium, call for submissions. Students rarely presented at this event. It was mainly for faculty and graduate researchers to share their work. But the flyer stated that exceptional undergraduate research would be considered. Andrew took a deep breath and snapped a photo of the submission details with his phone. He had 3 weeks to prepare his proof. 3 weeks to turn his midnight revelation into something that would force even Professor Thompson to see him clearly. For the first time since receiving his midterm, Andrew smiled. Sometimes actions spoke louder than words. And in mathematics, proof was everything. The math building was nearly empty at 10 p.m. Most students had long since returned to their dorms, but a soft light glowed from the third-floor study lounge. Inside, Andrew hunched over a table spread with papers, rubbing his tired eyes. He didn't notice the woman standing in the doorway until she spoke. "You're here late." Andrew looked up, startled. He recognized her immediately. Dr. Lin, the head of the mathematics department. He'd seen her photo on the department website, but had never met her in person. "I'm just working on something," he said, gathering his papers hastily. Dr. Lin walked into the room, her curiosity clearly piqued. Must be important to keep you here until this hour. Andrew hesitated. He didn't know if he could trust her, but something in her gentle tone made him want to. It's a topology problem, he finally said. I'm preparing a submission for the mathematics symposium. Dr. Lin's eyebrows rose slightly. Undergraduates rarely presented at the symposium, and first-year students never did. May I? She asked, gesturing to his work. Andrew handed her his main proof, watching nervously as she scanned the pages. Her expression changed from polite interest to genuine surprise, then deep concentration as she sat down across from him. This is fascinating, she said finally. You're approaching Brouwer's fixed-point theorem from a completely different angle. Andrew nodded. The traditional approach gets stuck when you move beyond the third dimension, but I found a way to generalize it using a modification of the contraction mapping principle. Dr. Lin finished, looking up at him with new respect. Impressive. How long have you been working on this? Andrew didn't want to admit it had only been a few weeks. On and off since high school, he said vaguely. And you're in which year of our program? First year. Dr. Lin set down the papers. First year, she repeated. And which courses are you taking? Calculus I with Professor Thompson, Introduction to Linear Algebra, Physics for Scientists, and 2 general education requirements. At the mention of Thompson, something flickered across Dr. Lin's face. How are you finding Professor Thompson's class? Andrew looked down. It's challenging. I see. Dr. Lin seemed to consider something. You know, this work you're doing goes well beyond undergraduate level. Have you shown it to Professor Thompson? Topology is his specialty. Andrew shook his head. I wanted to get it right first. What he didn't say was that he feared Thompson would dismiss his work without even reading it properly, just as he had with his exam answers. Dr. Lin studied him for a moment. The symposium selection committee can be quite particular. Would you mind if I gave you some feedback on your presentation approach? For the next hour, Dr. Lin went through Andrew's work page by page, asking questions and suggesting ways to strengthen his arguments. She never once suggested his approach was wrong or questioned his ability to handle such advanced mathematics. You have a natural gift for seeing connections that others miss, she told him as they wrapped up. That's rarer than you might think, even among professional mathematicians. As Andrew packed up his papers, Dr. Lin asked casually, By the way, what grade did you receive on your midterm in Professor Thompson's class? C+, Andrew said, embarrassed to admit it. Dr. Lin's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. And your understanding of the material seems quite thorough. The professor said my approaches lacked rigor, Andrew explained, trying to keep any bitterness from his voice. I see. Dr. Lin handed him a business card. If you ever want to discuss your mathematical interests further, my door is open, and do submit that proof to the symposium. I think many people would find it enlightening. After she left, Andrew looked down at her card. Had she just offered to help him? He wasn't sure, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like someone in a position of power had actually seen his potential. The next day, Andrew submitted his application to present at the symposium. The guidelines said applicants would be notified within 2 weeks. Now all he could do was wait and continue refining his proof. What Andrew didn't know was that Dr. Lin had gone straight from their meeting to her office, where she pulled up his student record and examined every detail, from his perfect SAT math score to his scholarship information. She also looked up the midterm grades for Thompson's class, noting the unusual distribution that seemed to favor certain students while penalizing others despite similar performance metrics. Then she reached for her phone. It was time to make some discreet inquiries about Professor Thompson's grading practices. The day of the mathematics symposium arrived with perfect fall weather. Golden leaves drifted down from the trees lining the university's central quad as students and professors hurried toward the Williams Hall auditorium. Andrew checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror one last time. He had borrowed a tie from Raj and wore the only dress shirt he owned, the same one he'd worn to his high school graduation. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the knot. You've got this, he told his reflection. You know this proof inside and out. When the acceptance email had arrived 2 weeks earlier, Andrew had almost fallen out of his chair. Undergraduate presenters were rare at the symposium. First-year presenters were unheard of. Yet here he was, scheduled in the afternoon session, right after Professor Thompson's presentation. The timing wasn't a coincidence, Andrew suspected, though he had no proof. Something about the way Dr. Lin had smiled when she mentioned the schedule made him wonder if she had arranged it on purpose. The morning sessions were filled with presentations Andrew barely understood, advanced research from mathematicians who had spent decades in their fields. He sat in the back row, rehearsing his own talk in his head while trying to calm his racing heart. At lunch break, Lily, Kevin, and Raj found him sitting alone outside the hall. "We're all coming to your presentation," Lily announced, handing him a sandwich she brought. "Eat this. You look like you're about to pass out." "Half the math department is talking about the freshman who got accepted to present," Kevin added. "Do you know how cool that is?" Andrew took a bite of the sandwich, though his stomach was too knotted to feel hungry. "Thompson is presenting right before me." His friends exchanged glances. "He doesn't know you're presenting after him," Raj said with a small smile. Dr. Lin kept the afternoon schedule under wraps until today. "I was helping at the registration desk, and I saw his face when he checked the program. He looked like he'd swallowed a lemon." After lunch, the auditorium filled completely. Andrew was surprised to see students from his other classes showing up, along with professors he'd never met. In the front row, Dr. Lin sat with several distinguished-looking visitors wearing name badges from other universities. Professor Thompson's presentation focused on his recent work in topological data analysis. Andrew listened carefully, noting how the professor's research had stalled at exactly the point where Andrew's own approach offered a solution. Thompson concluded by saying that certain topological mappings remained likely unsolvable with current approaches. Polite applause followed as Thompson gathered his notes. Dr. Lin approached the podium. "Thank you, Professor Thompson. Our next presenter is exploring an innovative approach to exactly the class of problems you just described." She turned toward the audience. "I'm pleased to introduce one of our most promising new students, Andrew Washington." Thompson's head snapped up in surprise as Andrew walked to the podium. The professor's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like alarm. Andrew connected his laptop to the projector, and his carefully prepared slides appeared on the screen. Taking a deep breath, he began. "The problem of extending Brouwer's fixed-point theorem to infinite dimensional spaces has challenged mathematicians for decades," he started, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Today, I'd like to present a new approach that offers a potential breakthrough." As Andrew moved through his presentation, the initial tension in the room gave way to genuine interest. He explained complex mathematical concepts clearly, making them accessible without oversimplifying. When he reached his core proof, the innovation that had kept him up late for weeks, he noticed several professors leaning forward in their seats. From the corner of his eye, Andrew could see Thompson's face growing increasingly pale. The professor began scribbling notes frantically, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then came the questions. A professor from MIT asked about the implications for computational topology. Another from Stanford wanted clarification on a particular lemma. Andrew answered each query thoughtfully, without hesitation. The final question came from a gray-haired woman in the back row. "Have you considered how your approach might apply to persistent homology problems?" "Yes," Andrew replied, launching into an explanation he hadn't prepared, but that flowed naturally from his understanding of the topic. "In fact, that connection is what originally led me to this approach." When the session ended, Andrew was surrounded by mathematicians eager to discuss his work further. Business cards were pressed into his hands. A publisher asked if he had considered turning his proof into a paper. Through the crowd, Andrew caught a glimpse of Professor Thompson slipping out a side door, his face unreadable. But it didn't matter anymore. In this room full of the country's top mathematical minds, Andrew had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. 3 days after the symposium, Andrew found a note in his campus mailbox asking him to come to Dr. Lin's office that afternoon. His friends had been celebrating his success nonstop, but he hadn't seen Professor Thompson since the presentation. The professor had cancelled their most recent class, citing a personal emergency. Andrew knocked on Dr. Lin's door at exactly 3 p.m. "Come in," she called. Inside, Andrew was surprised to find not just Dr. Lin, but also 2 other people, the university's Dean of Sciences and a woman he didn't recognize. And thank you for coming, Dr. Lin said warmly. This is Dean Rivera, and this is Dr. Powell from our Office of Academic Affairs. Andor shook their hands, anxiety building in his chest. Had he done something wrong? Please, sit down, Dean Rivera said. First, let me congratulate you on your outstanding presentation at the symposium. I've received emails from colleagues at 3 different universities asking about you. Thank you, sir, Andor said, still unsure why he was here. Dr. Lin smiled reassuringly. And we've asked you here because we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about Professor Thompson's grading practices. Andrew's heart pounded. I don't want to cause trouble. You haven't caused anything, Dr. Powell said firmly. But after your symposium presentation, several things became clear that we cannot ignore. Dean Rivera leaned forward. We've conducted a review of Professor Thompson's grading patterns over the past 5 years. We've found concerning disparities in how he evaluates work from students of different backgrounds. Your case brought it to our attention, Dr. Lin added, but you're not the only one affected. The pattern is clear and troubling. Andor sat quietly, processing what they were saying. Part of him felt validated. He hadn't imagined the unfair treatment. Another part felt sad that others had experienced the same thing. What happens now? He finally asked. Professor Thompson has been placed under review, Dean Rivera explained. He will not be teaching your class for the remainder of the semester. Dr. Chen from our department will take over. And your midterm has been regraded by an independent committee, Dr. Lin said, sliding a paper across the desk. Andor looked down at his exam. The C+ had been replaced with an A. This isn't special treatment, Dr. Powell clarified. Every student's work is being reassessed to ensure fair grading. There's something else, Dr. Lin continued. Based on your symposium presentation and recommendation letters we've requested from your other professors, we'd like to offer you a position in our department's Research Scholars Program. It's usually reserved for juniors and seniors, but your work deserves this opportunity. Andrew's eyes widened. The Research Scholars Program provided funding, mentorship, and opportunities to work alongside faculty on advanced projects. We're also establishing a new outreach initiative, Dean Rivera added. We want to identify and support talented math students from underserved high schools, students like you who have exceptional ability but might not have access to advanced courses. We'd like you to help us design this program. As Andrew walked across campus afterward, the setting sun painted the buildings in gold. He called his mother from a bench overlooking the central lawn. Mom, you're not going to believe what just happened. He told her everything, the symposium, the meeting, the research position, the outreach program. He could hear her crying proudly on the other end. I always knew you were special, she said. I always told you not to let anyone dim your light. The following week, Andrew entered his calculus class to find Dr. Chen at the front instead of Professor Thompson. The new professor treated everyone with respect, calling on students equally and providing thoughtful feedback. After class, Andrew was packing up his books when someone approached his desk. He looked up to see Professor Thompson standing there, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Washington, Thompson said stiffly. I owe you an apology. Andrew stayed silent, waiting. My conduct was unprofessional, Thompson continued. Your work at the symposium was exceptional. I should have recognized your talent sooner. Andrew nodded slowly. Thank you for saying that, Professor. Thompson hesitated, then added, the topology approach you developed, it's genuinely innovative. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss it further sometime. As Andrew watched Thompson walk away, he felt no triumph or vindication, just a quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally been acknowledged. That evening, he sat with Lily, Kevin, and Rage in the coffee shop where they'd first formed their study group. So, Lily asked, what happens next? Andrew smiled. I'm going to keep solving problems, and then I'm going to help other kids like me get the chance to do the same. Outside the window, new students walked across campus, some confident, some uncertain, all carrying their own dreams and struggles. Andrew watched them, knowing that because of what had happened, some of them would find a more welcoming path than he had. Sometimes, he thought, the hardest problems to solve weren't mathematical at all, but their solutions could change everything.